When a jet crashes in the frozen wilderness, a Navy SEAL prepares for rescue. Until his German Shepherd reacts in a way that tells him this is no accident. The cold had a way of pressing thoughts flat, smoothing the mind until only the essential remained. Snow covered everything in a seamless white sheet, erasing edges, swallowing sound, turning the wilderness into something ancient and watchful. The Navy SEAL moved through it with measured steps, each breath controlled, each decision deliberate. This was not a battlefield. It was not even a mission zone in the traditional sense. It was a place people did not come to, a place machines did not cross, a place that existed outside expectation. That was why the silence felt earned, almost sacred. He had learned long ago that silence could be a form of protection. In silence, mistakes announced themselves early. In silence, instincts spoke clearly. The German Shepherd at his side understood this without training commands or signals. The dog moved with quiet purpose, muscles rolling beneath thick fur, paws cutting clean paths through fresh powder. There was trust between them that did not require reinforcement. It had been forged over time, through patience rather than force, through shared endurance rather than commands. The sky had been empty when the sound came, not thunder, not wind. Something sharper, mechanical, tearing through the stillness like an accusation. The SEAL stopped before his mind caught up to his body. The dog froze too, ears lifting, posture changing in a way that made the moment feel heavier than it should have been. The sound grew rapidly, wrong in pitch and direction, as if it had no business being there at all. Then the ground trembled. Far ahead, beyond a low ridge of snow and stone, the sky bloomed with fire. Not an explosion that shattered the air, but a violent intrusion, heat and color where only white had existed. The sound arrived a second later, deep and concussive, echoing across the frozen land before collapsing back into silence. Snow drifted from nearby trees, settling again as if nothing had happened, as if the land itself was trying to erase what it had just witnessed. The SEAL did not move immediately. Training taught response, but experience taught restraint. He watched the smoke rise, dark against the pale sky, thin at first and then thicker, curling upward with intention. Aircraft did not fly this route. That fact settled into him slowly, bringing with it a quiet unease. This was not an error in navigation. This was not coincidence. Something had gone wrong in a place designed to reveal nothing. The German Shepherd broke the stillness first, releasing a low sound from deep in its chest, not a bark, but a warning. The SEAL placed a gloved hand lightly against the dog's shoulder, grounding both of them. He felt the animal's tension, the readiness coiled beneath discipline. They stood together, man and dog, watching smoke stain the horizon where no human story should have been unfolding. Moving toward the crash felt less like a decision and more like an obligation. Duty did not always arrive with orders. Sometimes it appeared quietly, demanding recognition rather than permission. Each step forward brought new details into view. The snow near the impact site was disturbed, churned into uneven ridges. Bits of dark metal lay scattered like debris from a storm that had no name. Heat bled into the air, subtle but undeniable, warping the cold just enough to remind him how fragile the balance was. There were no voices, no alarms, no movement beyond the slow drift of smoke and the dog's shifting posture. The SEAL listened for sounds of survival, for any indication that the crash had left something behind other than wreckage. His senses stretched outward, cataloging the environment the way they always did, but nothing answered back. The absence itself became a presence, heavy and insistent. The dog began to circle, nose low, movements precise. This was not panic. This was assessment. The SEAL trusted that more than he trusted his own assumptions. He followed without speaking, careful not to disturb anything that might explain what had happened here. The aircraft's remains told a fragmented story, one piece at a time, none of it complete. There were no markings he recognized, no clear signs that this belonged to any routine operation. The wreckage felt anonymous, deliberately stripped of identity. Snow fell lightly now, thin flakes catching on his clothing, softening edges, hiding tracks almost as quickly as they formed. Time worked against clarity here. Whatever answers existed would not wait. The SEAL felt the familiar pull between caution and urgency, a tension that had followed him through every environment he had ever served in. This place was no different, only quieter, colder, less forgiving. The German shepherd stopped suddenly, body rigid. The change was immediate and unmistakable. The dog's focus locked onto something ahead, something partially obscured by snow and shadow. The seal's hand tightened instinctively, his posture lowering as he scanned the area. There were no signs of threat, no movement beyond the slow settling of ice and ash, but the dog's reaction carried weight. It was not reacting to debris, it was reacting to presence. The seal felt it then, a shift that had nothing to do with temperature. The realization came without drama, without sound, settling into him with quiet certainty. This place was not empty. Whatever had fallen from the sky had not ended its story on impact. Something remained, unseen, waiting to be discovered or protected, and the responsibility for that discovery had landed squarely on him. He looked once more at the smoke curling into the pale sky, then down at the dog, whose attention never wavered. The wilderness closed in around them, vast and indifferent, offering no guidance and no mercy. In that moment, standing between silence and fire, the seal understood that the mission had already changed. It had changed without orders, without witnesses, without permission. As the fire continued to burn quietly in the snow, the seal realized he was no longer searching wreckage. He was standing at the edge of something still, alive. Before the seal can assess the wreckage, his German shepherd senses something no human eye can see. The wilderness did not announce its secrets loudly. It revealed them through subtle shifts, through instincts honed beyond reason. The German shepherd moved differently now, no longer pacing in controlled arcs but adjusting its path with purpose, as if drawn by an invisible thread. The seal noticed the change immediately. Years of working together had taught him to read the smallest deviations in the dog's behavior. This was not curiosity, this was recognition. He slowed his pace, allowing space without surrendering control. Trust, he had learned, was not blind. It was earned repeatedly through consistency. The dog had never led him into danger without reason, and never hesitated when caution was required. In this frozen expanse, where sound carried too far and mistakes lingered too long, that trust mattered more than any piece of equipment. Snow compressed under their boots and paws, leaving marks that the wind would soon erase. The air carried faint traces of heat and metal, but beneath it all was something else, something organic that did not belong to broken machinery. The German shepherd lowered its head. Wreath visible, movements precise. Each step felt intentional, measured against a sense the seal could not fully access but had learned to respect. They had trained for environments like this, though training never captured reality completely. In controlled settings, variables were known. Out here, uncertainty ruled. The seal adjusted his posture, scanning without dramatics, aware that alertness did not require tension. He stayed close enough to intervene, far enough to allow the dog freedom to interpret what it sensed. The bond between them had not formed in a single mission or moment of heroism. It had grown through quiet routines, through long hours of movement and stillness, through decisions that demanded patience rather than force. The seal did not speak commands unless necessary. The dog did not wait for permission when instinct was clear. That balance had kept them both alive more times than he cared to count. As they moved farther from the central wreckage, the environment subtly shifted. The snow here was less disturbed, the ground beneath firmer, as if the land itself resisted intrusion. The German shepherd paused, ears forward, body angled slightly to shield rather than confront. The seal recognized the posture. It was protective, not aggressive. Whatever lay ahead was not perceived as a threat, but as something vulnerable. He felt an unexpected weight settle in his chest. Missions often began with clarity and ended in complication, but this one felt inverted. The confusion came first, followed by a quiet sense of responsibility that had no clear source. He was not here because someone had sent him. He was here because circumstances had placed him at the center of a moment that demanded witness. The dog stopped again, this time longer. Its breathing slowed. The seal knelt, resting one gloved hand lightly against the animal's side, feeling the steady rhythm beneath fur and muscle. Grounding himself, he let his awareness expand. The wind shifted slightly, carrying a scent that was not smoke and not fuel. It was faint, human-adjacent, softened by cold and time. He did not rush forward. Whatever the dog had detected deserved respect. Moving too quickly could erase fragile clues or disturb something meant to remain undisturbed. The seal had learned that restraint could be a form of courage, especially when instinct urged action. The German shepherd took a few careful steps, then stopped, looking back briefly as if to confirm the seal's presence. That glance carried no doubt, only confirmation. Together they advanced. What they found was not immediately visible. Snow covered most of it, shaped by wind into deceptive curves that concealed depth. The dog began clearing gently with its paws, not digging frantically but revealing carefully. The seal watched closely, heart steady but alert, understanding that whatever emerged would shape the path forward. This was the moment when the seal felt the full weight of companionship. Alone, he might He dismissed the signals as environmental noise. Alone, he might have focused only on the wreckage behind him. But partnership expanded perception. It slowed judgment. It allowed space for truth to surface without force. As the outline beneath the snow became clearer, the seal resisted the urge to define it too quickly. Labels created assumptions, and assumptions narrowed response. Instead, he cataloged what he saw: the absence of debris, the way the snow had settled unnaturally, the subtle signs of shelter rather than impact. The dog remained still now, attention fixed, presence calm but unwavering. The silence deepened, no longer empty but expectant. The seal became acutely aware of his own breathing, the way sound traveled in cold air. He adjusted his position to block the wind, instinctively creating a barrier without knowing precisely what he was protecting. The action came from training, but the impulse came from something older. In that moment, the seal understood that the dog was not simply responding to scent or movement. It was responding to meaning, to life in some form. That realization shifted the center of gravity inside him. Whatever this mission had been, whatever it was becoming, it now carried a moral dimension that could not be ignored. He glanced back toward the crash site, where smoke still rose, marking the origin of this unfolding story. Distance had already begun to form between what he had seen and what he was now discovering. The wreckage felt like context rather than conclusion. The German shepherd leaned forward slightly, body aligned with the seal's, as if reinforcing the shared space. There was no urgency in the dog's posture, only insistence. This mattered. This required attention, patience, and care. The seal took a slow breath, steadying not his fear but his intent. Whatever lay ahead would not be met with haste. Loyalty demanded presence. Protection demanded humility. Courage, he knew, often appeared in moments where force was unnecessary and restraint carried the greater weight. The wilderness remained indifferent, snow continuing to fall lightly around them, softening edges, hiding nothing and everything at once. Within that quiet, man and dog stood aligned, bound by trust that had no need for explanation. As the German shepherd lowers its head and refuses to move away, the seal realizes the dog has not found wreckage. It has found someone who cannot be left behind. What begins as a routine rescue instinct quickly turns into something that doesn't follow any known protocol. The seal had learned to separate emotion from action, but he had never learned to ignore responsibility. Whatever lay beneath the snow was not yet visible in full, but the context around it demanded caution rather than speed. Rescue was never about rushing forward. It was about preserving what could still be preserved. He adjusted his stance, mentally shifting into a familiar framework, one built on structure and order. This was supposed to be simple. Assess, secure, communicate. That rhythm had guided him through countless situations, yet almost immediately the rhythm broke. There was no clear perimeter to establish, no defined scene that matched training scenarios. The terrain offered no boundaries, only openness that felt misleading. The seal scanned instinctively, not searching for threats but for coherence. Something about the layout did not align with the idea of an accident. The distance between the crash site and this discovery felt deliberate rather than random, as if the landscape itself had been used as cover. The German shepherd remained still, positioned close, not pressing forward but refusing to retreat. That choice mattered. The dog understood restraint as well as urgency. The seal took it as a signal to slow further, to read the environment rather than impose structure upon it. He reached for his radio out of habit more than expectation. The device was a lifeline, not just to command but to clarity. Static answered him. No confirmation, no acknowledgement. He adjusted the frequency, then tried again. The silence that followed felt heavier than before, no longer neutral but isolating. Communication had always been part of rescue. Without it, decisions carried more weight and fewer safeguards. He accepted the reality without frustration. Panic solved nothing. He had operated alone before, in places where support existed only in theory. Still, this felt different. Not more dangerous, but more ambig. UOs. Ambiguity demanded discipline. The SEAL moved closer, careful not to disturb the snow unnecessarily. He did not kneel yet. He wanted to understand the shape of the moment before entering it. The outline beneath the snow suggested shelter, not debris. The absence of sharp edges stood out. This was not the aftermath of impact. It was the evidence of intent. Rescue training emphasized one truth above all else: context saves lives. Misreading context cost them. The SEAL's mind worked quietly, connecting details without forcing conclusions. Aircraft wreckage rarely left survivors this far from the point of impact unless movement had occurred afterward. Movement implied choice. Choice implied awareness. Awareness implied responsibility somewhere beyond chance. The German Shepherd shifted slightly, adjusting position to remain between the SEAL and the concealed form. It was a protective instinct, but not defensive. The dog did not perceive danger emanating from what lay beneath the snow. Instead, it seemed to acknowledge fragility. That distinction settled deeply with the SEAL. He finally knelt, movements controlled, deliberate. The cold seeped through layers, reminding him that time did not pause for clarity. He brushed away snow carefully, exposing just enough to confirm his growing suspicion. This was not wreckage. This was not equipment. This was evidence of survival. Yet something still did not align. There were no distress markers, no emergency signals, no visible attempt to attract attention. Whoever had ended up here had not expected to be found, or had not wanted to be. That realization complicated the concept of rescue. Helping someone who wanted help was straightforward. Helping someone who had chosen concealment required humility. The SEAL withdrew his hand slightly, reassessing. Rescue was not only about physical preservation, it was about consent, context, and consequence. He had sworn to protect life, but also to respect agency. The balance between those two ideals was rarely clean. He glanced again toward the distant smoke, now thinner, beginning to disperse into the sky. The crash felt increasingly like the opening chapter rather than the central event. The true story was unfolding here, quietly, without spectacle. The radio crackled faintly, then fell silent again, not enough to convey information, but enough to remind him of absence. Whatever systems existed beyond this wilderness were either unreachable or unwilling to intervene. That meant responsibility rested fully with him. He considered the protocols he knew, mentally sorting through them, discarding those that did not apply. There was no checklist for this exact situation. There never was. Protocol provided structure, but judgment provided direction. The SEAL had learned to rely on both, knowing when one needed to lead. The German Shepherd finally sat, posture calm, eyes alert. The message was clear. This was not a moment for force or haste. This was a moment for patience. E for observation. For understanding what had been set in motion long before the crash had torn through the sky. The SEAL felt a subtle shift within himself, the quiet acknowledgement that this mission had already diverged from expectation. He was no longer reacting to an event. He was responding to a situation shaped by choices he did not yet understand. That realization carried weight, but also clarity. Rescue, he understood now, might not mean extraction. It might mean protection. It might mean silence. It might mean bearing witness when no one else would. He straightened slightly, careful not to disturb what remained concealed. The cold air filled his lungs, sharp and grounding. He rested a hand briefly against the dog's shoulder, not as reassurance but as confirmation of partnership. Whatever came next would be faced together. The wilderness offered no answers, only space. Space to decide, space to act with intention rather than impulse, and in that space the SEAL recognized the most unsettling truth of all. This situation had been designed to go unnoticed. The crash, the distance, the silence, none of it was accidental. As the radio falls completely silent in his hand, the seal realizes there will be no instructions. Only the consequences of whatever choice he makes next. The German shepherd uncovers something beneath the snow that turns the crash into a secret. The seal understood before he fully saw it that whatever lay beneath the surface was not meant to be found quickly. Snow had been layered carefully, shaped by hands rather than weather. This was not the random covering of a storm, but the deliberate concealment of something fragile. The German shepherd's movements reflected that truth. There was no frantic digging, no urgency driven by panic. The dog worked with precision, as if aware that care mattered as much as discovery. The seal adjusted his position, lowering himself to the ground, allowing the moment to unfold without interference. His breath slowed, not from fear but from respect. Years of experience had taught him that not every revelation demanded immediate action. Some demanded stillness first. As more snow was cleared, the outline became unmistakable. This was not debris scattered by impact. It was a sheltered space, shallow but intentional, shaped to block wind and retain warmth. The seal felt the weight of realization settle into his chest. Someone had survived long enough to think, to choose concealment, to prepare for waiting rather than rescue. The German shepherd paused, then stepped back slightly, giving the seal space. That simple gesture carried meaning. The dog had done its part. What remained required human judgment. The seal leaned forward carefully, mindful of his shadow, mindful of how presence alone could alter a fragile situation. He did not speak. Words had weight here, even unspoken ones. Instead he observed. The signs were subtle but clear to trained eyes. The way the snow had compacted unevenly, the faint impressions beneath, the absence of panic-driven disruption. This was not chaos. This was controlled endurance. The seal felt an unexpected surge of humility. Whatever had happened in the sky had brought destruction, but what had happened on the ground afterwards spoke of resilience. Someone had made choices under pressure, not reckless ones, but measured, patient ones. That commanded respect. He removed a glove slowly, allowing bare fingers to sense temperature differences through the snow. Cold was everywhere, but beneath the surface there was a faint contrast, not warmth, but resistance. Life did not always announce itself with heat. Sometimes it announced itself by refusing to disappear entirely. The German shepherd watched closely, body still, eyes alert. The dog did not whine or shift. It understood that noise could shatter whatever fragile balance existed. The partnership between them deepened in that quiet, built not on action but on shared restraint. As the seal cleared just enough snow to confirm what he already knew, the truth sharpened. This was not cargo, not equipment, not evidence meant for recovery teams. This was a person, concealed not out of fear of the environment, but fear of being found too soon by the wrong eyes. That realization reframed everything. The crash was no longer the central mystery. It was the distraction, the noise that drew attention away from what truly mattered. The seal felt the story rearrange itself in his mind, pieces shifting into alignment. This had not been a simple failure. It had been a movement, a transition, a deliberate attempt to erase something by burying it in chaos. He withdrew slightly, careful to restore some of the snow, not to hide the discovery but to protect it. Exposure could be as dangerous as concealment. The cold, the wind, the passage of time all worked against survival. Preservation required patience. The seal's sense of duty evolved in that moment. Duty was no longer defined by extraction or reporting. It was defined by stewardship, by deciding what must be shielded until truth could surface safely. He considered the systems he had once trusted implicitly, chains of command, standard procedures, emergency responses. None of them felt appropriate here. Whatever forces had orchestrated this moment had done so with precision. Involving others too quickly could end the story before it was understood. The German shepherd shifted closer, positioning itself to block wind from the exposed area. The action was instinctive, protective without instruction. The seal felt a quiet acknowledgement pass between them. The dog had not found an object. It had found responsibility. The environment seemed to close in, not threatening, but expectant. Snow continued to fall, light and steady, as if attempting to reclaim the ground. The smoke from the crash site was now barely visible, dissolving into the sky. The world was already moving on. The seal knew then that time was no longer measured in minutes but in decisions. Each choice would shape not only outcome but meaning. He could walk away, report later, let processes unfold, or he could remain, observe, protect, and learn what this hidden presence represented. He chose to remain, not out of defiance but out of respect for the effort that had brought this moment into being. Survival was rarely accidental. Someone had endured long enough to deserve more than dismissal. The German Shepherd settled beside him, calm and steady, embodying loyalty without expectation of reward. The seal placed a gloved hand briefly against the dog's back, grounding himself in the simplicity of shared purpose. This discovery did not demand action yet. It demanded understanding, and understanding required silence, patience, and courage of a quieter kind. The seal lifted his gaze once more toward the vast, white expanse surrounding them. There were no witnesses here, no records being made, only choices unfolding in isolation. He knew now that whatever had fallen from the sky had done its job. It had diverted attention, created confusion, bought time. But time was running out, and the truth, buried carefully beneath the snow, was no longer alone. As the seal finishes covering the discovery again, he realizes this was never meant to be rescued. It was meant to disappear. Every detail now points to one unsettling truth. The crash was meant to erase something, not save anyone. The seal did not move away from the site immediately. He stayed low, letting the cold press against him, letting the silence speak. Moments like this demanded patience more than action. The discovery beneath the snow had changed the weight of everything around him. What had first appeared as an isolated accident now felt like a carefully arranged distraction. The wreckage in the distance was loud and dramatic, but the truth lay quietly hidden, protected by snow and time. He replayed the sequence in his mind, not as memories but as data. The flight path that should not have existed, the lack of markings, the distance between the crash site and the concealed shelter. None of it aligned with chance. Each element suggested intention, layered on top of intention, choices made well before impact. The seal had seen chaos before. This was not chaos. This was design. The German Shepherd remained close, posture calm but attentive, as if aware that the danger here was not immediate or physical but something slower and more complex. The dog's presence grounded the seal, reminding him that loyalty did not require explanation, it required consistency. He trusted that instinct more than any distant authority that could not see what he was seeing now. The seal rose carefully and moved a short distance away, just far enough to observe the scene as a whole. From that vantage point the landscape told a clearer story. The crash site drew the eye first, as intended. Anyone approaching from a distance would focus there, spend time assessing damage, searching for survivors among the wreckage. By the time they widened their search, snow and weather would have done the rest. The hidden shelter had not been placed randomly. It was positioned with knowledge of terrain, wind direction, and visibility. Someone had planned for concealment, not comfort. Survival had been prioritized over rescue. That detail alone reframed the moral equation. This was not a victim waiting passively. This was someone trying to endure without being seen. The seal felt the familiar tension of conflict rise within him. Loyalty had been a guiding principle throughout his life. Loyalty to team, loyalty to mission, loyalty to the structures that gave meaning to sacrifice. But loyalty without truth had always been fragile, and truth, once seen, could not be unseen. He considered the next steps available to him. Reporting the discovery would initiate a chain of events beyond his control. Others would arrive, protocols would activate, questions would be asked, but not necessarily the right ones. The presence beneath the snow would become an object of procedure rather than a person shaped by circumstance. Walking away, on the other hand, felt like complicity. The seal had learned that silence could be protective, but it could also be enabling. The difference lay in intent. Silence that preserved life was different from silence that erased it. The German Shepherd shifted slightly, mirroring the seal's internal pause. The dog did not pull or push. It simply remained, present and observant, as if reinforcing the idea that decisions did not need to be rushed to be meaningful. The seal placed a hand against the dog's shoulder again, not out of habit but gratitude. Partnership mattered most when certainty was absent. The seal returned his attention to the hidden shelter, studying it with renewed perspective. Whoever was concealed there had survived a crash, evaded immediate detection, and chosen patience over panic. That combination spoke of discipline, training, or desperation shaped by experience. None of those deserved dismissal. The question was no longer whether the crash had been intentional. The question was who benefited from its silence. He thought of the systems designed to handle incidents like this. They were built for efficiency, not nuance, for resolution, not reflection. This situation demanded the opposite. It demanded time, care, and restraint. It demanded that someone remain close enough to protect the truth before it was reshaped. The SEAL felt the weight of isolation more acutely now. There would be no validation for whatever choice he made, no immediate reinforcement. This was the kind of decision that defined character quietly, without recognition, the kind that followed a person long after the moment had passed. Snow continued to fall, light but persistent, reinforcing how quickly evidence could vanish. The environment itself seemed aligned with concealment, as if nature had been enlisted in the effort to erase what mattered. The SEAL recognized the irony. Truth was fragile not because it was weak, but because it was often inconvenient. He adjusted his position once more, choosing proximity over distance, protection over detachment. Whatever the outcome, he would not allow this discovery to be reduced to a footnote or forgotten beneath procedure. That choice did not feel heroic. It felt necessary. The German Shepherd settled again, calm and unwavering, embodying loyalty without expectation. The SEAL found clarity in that simplicity. Loyalty was not blind adherence. It was commitment to what deserved safeguarding. The crash in the distance no longer commanded his attention. Its purpose had been served. The real stakes were here, quiet and unresolved, waiting for someone to choose between ease and integrity. The SEAL took a slow breath, steadying himself not for action, but for consequence. He understood now that whatever came next would not be reversible. Once truth was protected, it demanded follow-through. Once sacrifice was chosen, it required endurance. And in that stillness, with snow closing in and silence holding firm, the SEAL accepted the hardest truth of all. This was no longer about survival. It was about whether the truth would be allowed to live. As the SEAL looks back toward the crash site, he realizes that exposing the truth may cost him everything he has ever sworn loyalty to. With no orders, no signal, and no witnesses, the SEAL chooses a mission that exists only by conscience. The decision did not arrive with certainty. It arrived with acceptance. The SEAL understood that clarity was a luxury rarely afforded at moments that mattered most. He did not frame what he was doing as defiance. He framed it as responsibility. There were moments when duty extended beyond instruction, when adherence to values mattered more than adherence to process. His was one of those moments. He remained where he was, deliberately resisting the instinct to move toward visibility. Exposure brought attention, and attention invited forces that could not yet be trusted. Instead, he focused on preservation. The concealed shelter beneath the snow was fragile, not just physically but symbolically. It represented a truth that had survived impact, concealment, and time. That truth deserved protection before it faced judgment. The German Shepherd stayed close, sensing the shift without needing explanation. The dog's posture was steady, calm, alert without tension. This was the stance of endurance, not confrontation. The SEAL took comfort in that. Loyalty was often loud in stories, dramatic and declarative. In reality, it was quiet. It showed up as presence when abandonment would have been easier. He assessed the environment again, this time not as a responder but as a guardian. Wind direction, snowfall pattern, visibility from elevated ground. He memorized details he might need later, not for reporting, but for discretion. This was not about hiding forever. It was about buying time, time for understanding, time for context, time for truth to breathe without being reshaped. The radio remained silent. He did not attempt to force it back to life. Silence was no longer an obstacle. It was insulation. Without a signal, there were no interruptions, no premature escalations. The SEAL had learned that sometimes the most dangerous thing was not isolati, but intervention without understanding. He adjusted the snow carefully, reinforcing the shelter without sealing it. Preservation required balance. Too much concealment could be as harmful as exposure. The German Shepherd mirrored his movements, positioning itself instinctively to block wind and maintain warmth. The dog's actions were simple, uncalculated, and profoundly effective. self-protection did not always require complexity. As minutes stretched, the SEAL's thoughts turned inward. He thought of the oaths he had taken, not as words recited but as principles lived. Protection, service, integrity. None of them specified convenience. None of them promised safety. They demanded judgment when structure failed. He knew that by staying he was choosing a path without validation. No report would immediately justify his decision. No superior would approve it in advance. This was the kind of choice that existed in the space between rules, where outcomes could not be guaranteed and motives would later be questioned. He accepted that weight without resentment. The German shepherd shifted closer again, settling into stillness. The SEAL rested a hand briefly against the dog's back, grounding himself in the reality of shared purpose. This was not isolation. It was partnership. It was the quiet strength of knowing that loyalty did not require explanation to be real. The snow continued to fall, light and steady, transforming the landscape inch by inch. The crash site in the distance faded. Further into the background, smoke thinning, edges softening, its purpose had been to draw eyes away, and it had done so effectively. The SEAL understood now that the true measure of this mission would not be how quickly it ended, but how carefully it unfolded. He considered movement, not toward extraction, but toward positioning. Subtle shifts that would allow observation without exposure. Choices that favored resilience over reaction. He was not hiding from responsibility, he was shaping it. There was no urgency in his movements, only intention. Every action served preservation rather than progress. That distinction mattered. Progress could come later. Preservation was required now. The SEAL knew that once others became aware of this place, control would be lost. Processes would take over. Narratives would form. Truth would be filtered through urgency and authority. His role, for now, was to prevent that acceleration, to slow the story down long enough for it to be understood. He felt no sense of heroism in that realization, only humility. This was not a moment for recognition. It was a moment for restraint, the kind that went unnoticed unless it failed. The German shepherd lifted its head briefly, scanning the horizon, then settled again. The SEAL followed the movement with his eyes. Nothing had changed outwardly, no new sounds, no approaching presence. But the internal landscape had shifted completely. The mission he was now on did not belong to any map or record. It ended to principle. He accepted that consequences would follow. Choices like this always created ripples. He did not know who would be affected, or how far those ripples would travel. He only knew that retreating now would turn discovery into abandonment and silence into erasure. The SEAL adjusted his posture, committing fully to the space he occupied. He would stay present, he would observe, he would protect, not indefinitely, but deliberately. Until the moment came when truth could move forward without being destroyed in the process. The wilderness remained indifferent, snow falling steadily, wind shifting softly. There was no sign that the world beyond this place cared what happened here. That indifference clarified everything. Meaning did not come from attention, it came from choice. The German shepherd leaned lightly against him, a simple gesture of alignment. The SEAL felt a quiet steadiness settle in his chest. Fear had not vanished, but it had been organized. It no longer drove action. It informed caution. This mission had no authorization, no oversight, no clear ending. But it had purpose, and purpose, he knew, was enough to carry him forward. As night begins to settle over the frozen landscape, the SEAL realizes that staying hidden may now be as dangerous as being discovered. The longer the SEAL protects the truth, the higher the price begins to rise. Time moved differently now. The SEAL felt it not in minutes or hours, but in pressure. Pressure that gathered quiet, like snow on a weak branch, invisible until it became too heavy to ignore. Staying hidden had bought space, but space came with its own risks. The longer he remained, the more variables shifted beyond his control. Weather changed, visibility faded, and with each passing moment, the likelihood of unseen consequences grew. The cold deepened as evening settled in, not violently but persistently. It tested endurance rather than strength. The SEAL adjusted his position slightly, conserving energy, mindful that resilience was not about resistance alone but adaptation. The German shepherd remained close, body aligned with his, sharing warmth without restlessness. The dog seemed to understand that movement now would invite attention rather than safety. Isolation began to press inward, not as fear, but as awareness. Awareness that no one else knew what he knew, that no one else was standing between truth and erasure. That weight did not crush him, but it reshaped his priorities. Comfort became irrelevant. Certainty disappeared. Only responsibility remained. He thought of the life beneath the snow, not as a concept, but as a presence. Someone who had endured long enough to deserve more than disappearance. Someone whose survival had not been accidental, but sustained through patience and restraint. The seal understood that protection was no longer abstract, it was personal. The German shepherd shifted suddenly, posture tightening just enough to register concern. The seal noticed him immediately. This was not alarm, it was sensitivity to change. The wind carried something new. Not a sound, but a subtle disturbance in pattern. The kind that suggested movement somewhere beyond sight. The wilderness did not reveal intent easily, but it always revealed disruption. The seal remained still, resisting instinctive reactions. Action without clarity could undo everything he had preserved. He placed a steadying hand against the dog's shoulder, signaling calm rather than control. The dog responded instantly, settling, trust unbroken. Moments passed, then more. Nothing emerged. Whatever had shifted remained distant, unresolved. But the message was clear. This place was no longer untouched. The margin for error had narrowed. Fatigue crept in quietly, not physical exhaustion but the mental strain of sustained vigilance. The seal welcomed it rather than resisted it. Fatigue reminded him that he was human, not a symbol or instrument. It kept him grounded, cautious. Overconfidence was more dangerous than weariness. He reflected briefly on the cost of his choice. Not in regret, but in honesty. Walking away would have been simpler. Reporting immediately would have transferred responsibility. Staying meant absorbing consequence personally. That was the nature of sacrifice. It did not announce itself. It revealed itself slowly, through accumulation. The German shepherd leaned closer as the temperature dropped further, pressing warmth against the seal's side. The gesture carried no expectation, only loyalty. The seal felt something tighten in his chest, not from fear but from clarity. Brotherhood did not always wear a uniform. Sometimes it had 4 legs and unwavering trust. Another shift in the air, this one closer. The dog's ears lifted slightly, then settled. Not threat, not safety, uncertainty. The seal catalogued the sensation carefully. He knew that discovery did not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it arrived through patterns breaking one by one. He adjusted the snow covering the shelter once more, subtle and careful, ensuring protection without drawing attention. Each movement was deliberate. The margin between care and exposure was thin now. He understood that if this presence were discovered prematurely, the truth would not be handled gently. It would be processed, categorized, controlled. That thought hardened his resolve. The cost of doing what was right was no longer hypothetical. It was unfolding in real time. Risk was no longer distant. It was immediate, shared, and unavoidable. The German shepherd suddenly stiffened, body angling instinctively to shield rather than confront. The seal followed the cue instantly, senses narrowing, attention sharpening. Whatever had changed was close enough now to matter, close enough to force decision. He did not reach for the radio. He did not signal. He did not move away. Protection sometimes meant stillness, even when every instinct urged reaction. He trusted the discipline that had carried him is far. The moment stretched, fragile and tense, balanced between exposure and concealment. The seal felt the full weight of what he stood to lose. Career, reputation, the comfort of belonging to systems that rewarded obedience. None of it outweighed what was at stake beneath the snow. Then the dog shifted again, more urgently this time, positioning itself directly over the concealed shelter. Not aggressively, protectively, the seal's breath caught, not in panic, but in recognition. The line had been crossed. Whatever presence lingered beyond the snow, whatever consequences waited ahead, this was no longer a solitary burden. The risk now extended to the one companion who had followed him without question. Loyalty, he realized, was no longer just something he was offering. It was something he was responsible for safeguarding. He steadied himself, preparing not for confrontation but for consequence. Whatever happened next would test not his strength, but his willingness to endure loss without surrendering. Truth. The wilderness remained silent, holding its breath along with him. And in that silence the seal understood that the greatest cost of doing what was right was not danger to himself. It was the possibility of losing the one being who had trusted him completely. As the German shepherd refuses to move from the shelter, the seal realizes that loyalty itself is now at risk, and there may be no way to protect everyone. The truth survives, but it leaves the seal forever chang. Ed. Morning arrived without ceremony. The night loosened its grip slowly, shadows thinning, the frozen landscape revealing itself again in shades of white and gray. The seal had not slept, not fully. Rest came in fragments, awareness never fully releasing its hold. When light finally spread across the snow, it felt less like relief and more like exposure. Daylight did not bring safety. It brought consequence. The German shepherd rose first, stretching quietly, then settling back into its place beside the concealed shelter. Loyalty had not wavered. If anything, it had deepened, shaped by shared endurance rather than command. The seal placed a hand on the dog's back, grounding himself in the constancy of that presence. Whatever happened next, this bond would remain one of the few things untouched by uncertainty. The seal took stock of the moment. The environment had shifted. Tracks in the distance suggested movement that had not been there before. Nothing obvious, nothing immediate, but enough to confirm what he had already accepted during the night. The story was moving forward whether he was ready or not. He made a careful decision then, one shaped not by fear or defiance but by clarity. Preservation could not last forever. Truth, if held too tightly, could suffocate. The responsibility now was not only to protect what had been hidden, but to guide how it would be revealed. The seal adjusted the shelter with deliberate care, ensuring stability without drawing attention. I'd not expose more than necessary. Dignity mattered, even here, especially here. The presence beneath the snow had endured invisibility long enough. It deserved a transition that did not strip it of humanity. The German shepherd watched every movement, calm and attentive, as if understanding that this moment marked an ending as much as a beginning. The seal felt the weight of that truth settle into him. Missions ended, but some moments followed a person long after the environment changed. He activated the radio again, not with urgency, but with intention. This time, the signal connected, not clearly, not fully, but enough. He chose his words carefully, offering context without spectacle, facts without embellishment. He did not frame the discovery as an emergency. He framed it as a responsibility that required discretion. When the transmission ended, the seal felt no relief, only resolve. He had done what he could to shape the outcome without surrendering control entirely. What followed would unfold beyond his influence, but not beyond his values. As time passed, distant movement became visible. Small figures against the white expanse, methodical, cautious. The seal did not retreat. He did not advance. He stayed exactly where he was, visible enough to be seen, steady enough to command pause rather than reaction. The German shepherd remained at his side, posture calm, presence unwavering. This was not a standoff, it was a transition. The seal understood that how he carried hymns. Elf now would determine whether the truth was handled with care or reduced to procedure. When others finally reached him, there were questions in their posture before there were words. The seal answered only what was necessary. He did not dramatize, he did not accuse. He spoke with the quiet authority of someone who had stood alone long enough to know what mattered. The concealed shelter was approached carefully, protocols adjusted, voices lowered. The environment itself seemed to respond, wind easing, snow falling more gently. The seal watched closely, not out of distrust, but guardianship. His role was changing, but it was not ending. The German shepherd stayed close throughout, refusing separation. No one challenged it. Some forms of loyalty required no explanation. The seal felt a subtle release then, a loosening of tension that had built over hours and decisions. The hardest part was over, not because the situation was resolved, but because truth had survived intact. As events moved forward, the seal stepped back slightly, allowing systems to do what they were meant to do when guided correctly. He did not seek acknowledgement. He did not wait for validation. He had already measured the cost and paid it in full. Later, when the landscape returned to stillness and the crash site became nothing more than disturbed snow and memory, the seal stood once more with the German shepherd at his side. The wilderness looked unchanged, indifferent as ever. But he knew better. Something important had passed through this place, leaving a mark that would never be recorded fully. He felt no pride, only humility. The kind that came from knowing that doing the right thing did not make him exceptional, it made him accountable. The German shepherd nudged his hand gently, a familiar gesture, grounding him in the present. The seal looked down, meeting the dog's steady gaze. Loyalty had been tested here, not through force or conflict, but through patience, restraint, and trust. It had held. As they turned away from the site together, the seal understood that this mission would never appear in any official account. There would be no headline, no commendation, perhaps not even agreement about what had truly happened. But some truths did not need recognition to matter. They walked on, leaving the snow to settle once more, leaving the wilderness to reclaim its silence. The seal carried something with him now, not as a burden, but as a compass. A reminder that duty did not always wear the shape expected of it, and courage did not always announce itself loudly. He would return to the world changed, not hardened, but refined, more careful with trust, more deliberate with obedience, more committed to the quiet responsibilities that defined character when no one was watching. The German shepherd moved confidently beside him, tail steady, presence assured. Brotherhood did not fade when the mission ended. It endured in the way they walked forward together. Some missions are written down, but they decide forever who a man chooses to be. If this story stayed with you, it's because it touched something deeper than entertainment. Stories like this survive only when they're passed forward, quietly, by people who understand their weight. If you believe loyalty and truth still matter in a world that often looks away, you already know what to do. And now, an honest question. If you had stood there in the snow, with no orders and no witnesses, would you have walked away or stayed?